The incident took place in 2009. He does not clearly remember the exact date, but he vividly recalls that the night was filled with heavy clouds, rain, and stormy weather. Alamin Akash had a friend named Jewel, who used to drive an ambulance. That afternoon, Jewel called Alamin Akash and told him about a trip, asking if he would go to their area. Thinking that he would get the chance to drive, Alamin Akash happily agreed, as he enjoyed driving. Jewel gave him the address of a hospital and asked him to go there. Alamin Akash arrived around 3 p.m. Jewel handed over the vehicle key and introduced him to the helper, then explained that the body needed to be transported from one city to a village in another city. The exact name of the village is no longer clearly remembered by Alamin Akash. Jewel also mentioned that 3 family members of the deceased would travel along with the body. Alamin Akash waited there. Around 10 p.m., after the formalities were completed, the police called him. He was then shown the body. He saw that the tongue was protruding significantly, and the eyes were wide open. The sight made his body tremble. After that, everyone placed the body into the ambulance. Taking the name of Allah, Alamin Akash started driving. The helper sat beside him, while the family members stayed in the back with the body. After traveling some distance, he noticed through the rearview mirror that something black and hairy seemed to be moving around in the back. Its eyes were glowing bright red, and it looked as if light was coming from within them. The glow seemed to spread outward, almost lighting the path for that shadowy, hairy figure. At first, he dismissed it as a trick of the mind and did not pay much attention. But after a while, the helper also noticed the strange presence in the back. The helper asked, "Do you see something behind the vehicle?" Alamin Akash laughed lightly and said, "It's nothing, just focus ahead. How can you be scared of something so small?" Hearing this, the helper said, "Aren't you afraid?" A few others were called for this trip before, but no one agreed after hearing it was a body transport. Alamin Akash replied, "Ask your mentor if I'm afraid. I know spiritual practices. I've seen things far more terrifying than this, and I didn't get scared. This is nothing." While talking like this, they continued moving forward. Suddenly, one of the left tires of the vehicle got punctured. At that moment, heavy rain was pouring down, along with strong winds. In that situation, Alamin Akash said to the people accompanying the body, "I have some polythene. If you could help us by holding it over our heads, we could at least do the work with less rain falling on us." Since the tire could be changed quickly, they also got down and held the polythene over the heads of Alamin Akash and his helper. As a result, even though they got partially soaked, they were able to replace the tire. After that, when they were putting the damaged wheel back into the vehicle, they all noticed that the body had fallen off the stretcher onto the floor. Alamin Akash thought that it might have slipped off while being placed in the vehicle. He didn't consider it a big issue since the body was still inside the ambulance. They lifted the body back onto the stretcher, and he started driving again. This time, Alamin Akash began to feel that something unusually heavy had been loaded into the vehicle. The weight of the ambulance felt much greater, as if the vehicle was struggling to move forward. Somehow, he kept driving like that and eventually reached a toll plaza. He paid the toll and drove onto the bridge. After crossing the river, Alamin Akash noticed through the rearview mirror that the red-eyed, hairy figure was no longer just one. There were several of them now, chasing the vehicle from behind. It seemed like they had come very close to the ambulance, and their number appeared to be around 5 or 6. At that time, there were hardly any houses along that stretch of road. Suddenly, those black, hairy figures leaped onto the vehicle. As a result, the ambulance began to sway from side to side. Everyone started screaming in fear and reciting prayers, but nothing seemed to work. At one point, they forcefully pulled open the back door of the vehicle. Those hairy figures then entered the moving ambulance and began making horrifying growling sounds. Due to the suddenness of the 3 people sitting in the back with the body had already lost consciousness. Up to that point, things were still somewhat manageable. But then Alamin Akash saw in the rearview mirror that those hairy figures had started tearing flesh from the body's arms and legs and eating it. Seeing this, Alamin Akash reached the peak of terror. His helper also screamed and then lost consciousness inside the vehicle. At that moment, Alamin Akash was desperately trying to spot any shop or sign of people along the roadside, but he could see nothing. He was hoping to find even a small roadside shop where he could stop the vehicle, but unfortunately, there was nothing around. He felt as though he might lose control of the ambulance at any moment. The spiritual knowledge he possessed was of no help that day. He felt as if he couldn't even recite any prayer properly out of fear. He was that terrified. But when Alamin Akash began to feel as though a desperate plea for survival was coming from the mouth of the half-eaten body, he could no longer keep himself composed, because it felt like the body was speaking, trying to survive. In reality, it was just a corpse, the body of a dead person. But it seemed as if some kind of sound was coming from it. It sounded like the desperate cries of someone being brutally tortured, the kind of plea a person makes when fighting to stay alive. Hearing this, he could no longer hold himself together. At that moment, Alamin Akash suddenly applied a hard brake to the ambulance. As the vehicle came to a stop, it lightly crashed into a small roadside pillar, the kind that indicates distances to a destination like a milepost. After that, Alamin Akash remembered nothing. When he regained consciousness, he saw many people around him and a bus standing by the roadside. It was already past 3 a.m. Everyone kept asking him what had happened. Trying to understand the situation, he initially said that it was nothing serious. He had just fallen asleep. Hearing this, some people started saying things like, "If you drive after taking intoxicants, this is what happens. You don't even realize when you lose control." Different people were making different kinds of remarks. Alamin Akash then noticed that the front portion of the ambulance had been damaged from hitting the pillar. He also realized that the lower part of his pants was wet and stained with blood. There was a burning sensation in that part of his leg, although at that moment he did not feel much pain. By then, the helper and the others had also regained consciousness. When the people present looked into the back of the ambulance and saw the half-eaten, horrifying body, they understood that something abnormal must have happened. At that point, Alamin Akash was forced to tell the truth. Since such a terrifying incident had taken place and the ambulance was badly damaged, it was not possible for them to continue the journey at that moment. Later, at dawn, other arrangements were made to transport the remaining part of the body to its destination. After that, Alamin Akash and his helper arranged for the ambulance to be repaired and returned to the city. Because of this incident, he had to go through a lot of trouble. The part of his pants that had been soaked in blood was actually covering a wound. It seemed as if a portion of flesh had been torn away from that part of his leg. Later, he received treatment and the wound was bandaged. However, his helper suffered from a severe fever for about a week and eventually died. A few days after the incident, Alamin Akash went to his village home and told everything to his uncle. Hearing this, his uncle became very angry and scolded him, asking why he had agreed to such a trip. He also reprimanded him for not protecting himself properly before setting out, as such precautions were essential. Alamin Akash had learned spiritual practices from his uncle. According to him, those hairy figures were a type of corpse-eating demonic entity. They do not usually attach themselves to people, but once they do, they cause harm in one way or another. He believed that when they were changing the tire, those entities had tried to take the body, but for some reason they failed. Later, seizing the opportunity, they directly attacked the ambulance and consumed parts of the body. If the bus had not stopped and people had not arrived in time, those entities might have devoured the entire body. And those who had lost consciousness, including Alamin Akash, could have faced something far worse. After that, his uncle performed spiritual healing rituals on him for a long time. Although Alamin Akash experienced some minor incidents afterward, nothing as terrifying as this ever happened again. To this day, the scar on his leg remains. Every time he looks at it, he is reminded of that horrifying night. This was essentially the incident, a truly terrifying ambulance-related experience. Dear listeners, the second incident is about to begin. The incident took place in 1997. It happened with a person named MD Abul Hossein, a freedom fighter who was related to Firaz. At the time of the incident, Firaz was 5 years old. During that period, for some reason, a conflict started between Abul Hossein and another elder family member. It was the season for planting IRRI rice seedlings. Those who live in villages know how rice cultivation works during that time and how the seedlings are planted in the fields. Abul Hossein owned a machine used for supplying water to the rice fields. He did not hire anyone to operate or maintain it. Instead, he handled everything himself. He would regularly move from one field to another, ensuring that each field received the right amount of water at the proper time. Because of this, he mostly stayed at the machine shed and rarely came home. When it was time to eat, someone from the house would bring food to him at the shed. On the day of the incident, he had come home at noon to eat. However, for some reason, he left angrily without eating and went back toward the machine shed. The distance between his house and the machine shed was about half a kilometer. The shed was located beyond 5 rice fields from the main road. To reach it from the house, one had to first walk a short distance on a dirt road, then a small paved road. At the end of the paved road, there was a small culvert. After crossing that, one had to walk along the narrow ridges between the rice fields to reach the shed. The main location of this was that small culvert. The height difference between the road and the fields was significant, about 15 to 20 feet. The slope was very steep, so for easier movement, concrete retaining walls had been built along the sides of the culvert to hold the soil in place. Below the culvert, on both sides, there were deep ditches. Even during the dry season, there was water in them, about 25 to 30 feet deep. Because of this, people often threw waste there. In the middle of the fields where the machine shed was located, there were 4 other sheds as well. The distance between each shed was quite large. So, if any occurred or someone shouted for help, it would take a long time for one person to reach another. To the north of the field was Abul Hossein's home, and at the southern end was the house of one of Firaz's relatives, named Dulal Hossein. On that day, after leaving home, Abul Hossein went to the machine shed, arranged his work, and then set the water line for a field. After that, he went to Dulal Hossein's house at the southern end of the field. From the back of that house, one could clearly see the machine shed in a straight line. He went there and asked for food. After eating, he began speaking in a strange and confused manner, almost like a mad person. He told Dulal Hossein, "You don't need to stay in this house. Come live at my place. I will transfer all the land in my name to you. All the big trees at my house, you can cut them and take them. I don't need anything." He continued saying many other random and incoherent things. Dulal Hossein could not understand why he was speaking like that. He quietly listened and kept wondering what had suddenly caused such behavior. After some time, the Maghrib call to prayer began, and darkness started to fall all around. At that moment, he told Dulal Hossein and the others, "I should go back to the machine shed. Otherwise, one field might get too much water while another gets too little. You all should go to my house later. I'm leaving now." Saying this, he took a lantern in his hand and set off from Dulal Hossein's house toward the machine shed. He set off along the narrow ridges of the rice fields. Dulal Hossein followed him from a distance and then stood behind the house, watching to see where he was going. After he had gone some distance, Dulal Hossein suddenly noticed something unusual. Behind Abul Hossein, there was a figure that looked like a human, dressed in white flowing clothing. The figure appeared to be nearly twice his height and was following him at exactly the same pace. After observing this for a while, Dulal Hossein began to think. He could clearly see the lantern in Abul Hossein's hand, but the figure behind him had no light or lamp. Then how was it so clearly visible from such a distance? That night was a bright full moon night. Dulal Hossein thought that perhaps the moonlight was the reason he could see the figure so clearly. After a little while, the white figure suddenly seemed to double its speed and, within seconds, disappeared into the darkness. At the same moment, the lantern in Abul Hossein's hand went out. As soon as Dulal Hossein saw this, he tied up his lungi and ran toward him. Took him about 4 to 5 minutes to reach the spot. He found Abul Hossein lying face down in the muddy rice field. When he got there, his entire body was covered in mud. Dulal Hossein pulled him up and tried to support him on his shoulder to take him back home. But for some reason, he felt as if an invisible force was preventing him from moving forward. After struggling for quite some time, he somehow managed to reach closer to the nearby machine sheds and started shouting loudly for help. Hearing his cries, Two men from the village who were working in nearby machine sheds came to him. After hearing everything, they helped carry Abul Hossein back home. Seeing his condition, everyone at home began crying and shouting in panic. They asked Dulal Hossein where he had found him and what had happened. Dulal Hossein explained that he had come to his house in the afternoon and had been speaking strangely, saying many random and confusing things. He had not said anything at the time and had just listened quietly. Later, after evening, he left saying he needed to return to the machine shed. After he left, Dulal Hossein felt suspicious that something might be wrong. That is why he stood behind the house watching him. Then he described everything he had seen. He said that when he noticed the lantern had gone out, he immediately ran toward him and found him lying in the mud. It seemed like he was trying to get up, but something was forcefully pushing him down into the muddy water. Despite his efforts, he could not get up, and only faint groaning sounds could be heard. Dulal Hossein pulled him up and realized that he had already lost consciousness. He then called others and brought him home. After hearing all this, the family understood that something supernatural might be involved. Everyone started trying different traditional remedies they knew to bring him back to consciousness, such as heating iron and mixing it with water to make him drink, along with many other local practices common in rural areas. But even after trying many such remedies, nothing worked, and he did not regain consciousness. Then someone remembered a relative named Jamshir. Although he is no longer alive, during his lifetime he helped many people through spiritual healing. People from different places used to come to him and, by the grace of Allah, many found relief. Throughout his life, he never took any payment from anyone for his work. He did everything free of cost. If anyone insisted on giving him money for the sake of Allah, he would tell them to donate it to an orphanage, mosque, or madrasa instead. Because of this, people used to come to him from far and wide. He was also a relative of Firaz. At that time, everyone suggested calling Jamshir. Accordingly, Firaz's younger uncle ran to Jamshir's house and brought him. Jamshir came and recited prayers over Abul Hossein and performed spiritual healing for quite some time. Eventually, Abul Hossein regained consciousness. After regaining consciousness, he was asked what had happened to him and why he was in such a condition. He replied that when he had left Dulal Hossein's house and started walking along the narrow ridge of the field toward the machine shed, everything was normal at first. But after going some distance, he suddenly saw someone standing with their back turned. It looked like a small child, around 8 to 10 years old. He wondered whose child it could be, standing alone in the muddy field at that time of evening. He kept asking the child questions to know its identity, but it gave no response. Even after asking several times, when there was still no reply, he placed his hand on the child's shoulder and turned it toward himself. At that very moment, it revealed long, sharp teeth, made a terrifying expression, and suddenly jumped onto his neck, pressing down on his head. He tried for a long time to get up but could not. After that, he remembered nothing. After hearing all this from him, Jamshir performed more spiritual healing and recitations. After that, things remained normal for quite some time. About a month later, one night around 10 p.m., after finishing dinner, Abul Hossein left home to go to the machine shed to sleep. As mentioned earlier, to reach the shed from the house, one had to first walk along a dirt road, then onto a paved road, and after a short distance, go down beside the culvert and follow the field ridges. That night was extremely dark, a new moon night. Nothing around could be seen clearly. It felt as if the entire area was wrapped in a thick black blanket of darkness. In the middle of the fields, each machine shed had a small light on its roof, flickering dimly. Those faint lights were the only visible things in that darkness. Abul Hossein was a very brave and strong man. He was not someone who would ever step back out of fear. As a freedom fighter of Bangladesh, fear had never overcome him. When he crossed the culvert and started descending along its side, he suddenly slipped and fell. However, he quickly tried to stand up and managed to do so. By the grace of Allah, he had fallen onto the rice plants. If he had fallen into the deep ditch instead, it would have been nearly impossible to get help at that hour of the night. Moreover, there was no easy way to climb out of that ditch without assistance from someone else. After getting up, he washed the mud off his legs using water from the field. Then he went to the machine shed, cleaned himself properly, and changed his clothes. There were extra clothes kept there. After that, he continued his routine, moving around the fields to check whether each area was receiving the proper amount of water. One thing to note is that when he was coming down from the road earlier, near the culvert, he had noticed a very foul smell. However, he ignored it, thinking it was something normal, and continued with his work. Around 3 a.m., he suddenly heard the sound of someone crying in a sorrowful tone. The crying carried such deep pain that it felt as if someone was about to die while crying out in agony. He wondered who could be crying at such a late hour. As soon as he stepped out of the machine shed after hearing the sound, he looked around but saw no one. Yet the crying continued, coming from a certain direction. He tried to locate where the sound was coming from. After listening carefully for some time, he realized that the sound was coming from the area near the culvert. To see it for himself, he walked toward that direction. But in that pitch-dark night, nothing was clearly visible. Suddenly, he noticed that near the base of the culvert, in the water a short distance away, someone seemed to be bathing. He wondered who could possibly be bathing in such a dangerous place at that hour of the night. It was considered dangerous because during the rainy season, strong currents of water would flow beneath the culvert, creating deep holes on both sides. According to local beliefs, such deep water holes are often associated with unseen entities. He then called out toward that figure, saying, "Who are you, at this hour of the night, bathing in such a place? You must be very brave. If you value your life, come out of there immediately." Hearing this, a voice came from there in a strange, trembling tone, saying, "What have you seen of my courage? That day I couldn't show you my strength because of your nephew. You were saved. But today, who will save you?" As soon as these words were spoken, the figure leaped out of the water and grabbed hold of Abul Hossein's arms and legs. A fierce struggle began between them. They kept fighting for a long time. Eventually, when the time for Far arrived and the call of Allahu Akbar echoed from the mosque, the entity released him and disappeared into the air. In a terrified state, Abul Hossein ran toward his house, still covered in mud, and collapsed in the yard. Hearing the sound, the family members rushed outside and saw his condition. Immediately, someone was sent to call Jamshir. When Jamshir arrived and saw him, he once again performed spiritual healing and began reciting Ruqya properly. He instructed him to drink the blessed water and to bathe with it. Then Jamshir said, "Tonight I will arrange a session for you. I want to see who dares to attack you even after my Ruqya. Either it will die or I will." With that, Jamshir returned home. In the evening, he prepared everything necessary and sent word to bring Abul Hossein to his house. As soon as the message was received, everyone took him there together. After they arrived, Jamshir said, "Place him in the center of the circle I have drawn, and be careful. No one will speak, and no one will touch him. If anyone does, it could cause severe harm." Everyone followed his instructions and sat silently. Abul Hossein was placed in the middle of the circle. Then the Ruqya began. After about 2 to 3 hours, it felt as if everything around them was being shaken. A powerful wind started blowing, as though it would tear the house apart. After some time, the wind suddenly stopped, and everything became completely silent. At that moment, another presence manifested inside Abul Hossein. As soon as it appeared, it let out a loud, disturbing sound and began speaking in an unclear, distorted voice, using foul language. At first, no one could understand what it was saying. After a couple of minutes, it suddenly went silent. Then Jamshir asked, "Who are you? Where have you come from? And why are you tormenting him?" After asking several times, the entity suddenly started laughing. Jamshir said, "I am asking you questions. Why are you laughing instead of answering? Will you answer me properly? Or should I trap you inside a bottle?" As soon as he mentioned trapping it in a bottle, the entity began to cry in a trembling voice, saying, "No, please don't trap me in a bottle. I will suffer greatly. I won't be able to endure it." Jamshir replied, "Then answer my questions truthfully. Only then will you be spared. Otherwise, you will not escape today." The entity said, All right, ask what you want to know. Jamser repeated. Who are you? Where have you come from? And why are you hurting him? This time it answered, I have no name. 10 years ago, my parents put me inside a plastic bag and threw me into the water under that bridge. My father's home was in Bandeshwar village, and my mother's home was in Ratanganj. And you want to know why I am hurting him? Listen, he walks over my head every day, causes me pain. He has hurt me many times. That is why I will not spare him. I will kill him. Jamser said, Why do you lie in the middle of the path? Is that a place for you to lie down? It is a road meant for people to walk. Tell me, what should be your punishment? Should I trap you in a bottle and bury you forever? Or burn you into ashes? Hearing this, the entity began screaming and crying, saying, Forgive me. I made a mistake. I will never do this again. I have no place to stay. That is why I cannot go anywhere else. Give me a place to live. I promise I will never frighten anyone again. I will not harm anyone. I will stay in one place and never disturb anyone. Hearing its desperate pleas, Jamser said, All right, tell me. Where should I send you so that you will be satisfied? The entity replied, Wherever you think is best, send me there. Then, with the help of the jinns who assisted him in his healing practices, Jamser was advised to send it to a banyan tree on a hill called Maidar Chula. Following that advice, the entity was sent there. By the grace of Allah, Abul Hossein was completely freed from its influence. From that day on, he never faced any such problem again. It is said that the entity still resides in that banyan tree on the hill of Maidar Chula. As for its story, claiming it had no name and that its parents abandoned it in a plastic bag, the true mystery behind it was never fully understood. And this was the incident. Story 3. Around 2007 or 2008, there came a day when Russell Ahmed decided that he would go fishing. As soon as the thought crossed his mind, he acted on it. Gathering all the necessary fishing gear, including his rod and bait, he secured everything to his bicycle and set off toward his destination. Not far from his home, there was a cremation ground. On his way, he decided to head there for fishing, as it was known that a good number of fish could be found in that area. There was a reason behind this. The place was isolated, surrounded by dense vegetation, wild bushes, and overgrown plants. Human activity was rare there, and those who did venture into the area often managed to catch a significant amount of fish. Russell was a fairly brave and intelligent young man. He was not easily frightened and did not pay much heed to others. Slowly, he reached the cremation ground, stopped his bicycle, and began unloading his fishing equipment one by one. He leaned his bicycle against the iron structure used for cremation and walked over to a spot near a large banyan tree to begin fishing. Sitting at the base of the tree, he started preparing his hook with bait. It is worth mentioning that the road he had taken was unpaved at the time, though it has since been developed. Back then, very few people used that path, and it was not uncommon for long stretches to remain completely deserted. It was around 11 a.m. or noon when Russell arrived. The cremation ground itself lay about 200 to 300 yards away from the main road. From a distance, it appeared as nothing more than a patch of wilderness. There was a small shed-like structure and, in front of it, the iron pillars used for cremation. Beside those pillars stood a moderately large banyan tree. The entire area was eerily quiet, devoid of any noise or human presence. Within nearly half a kilometer, there were no nearby homes, though a few existed at a much greater distance. After placing his bicycle against the iron structure, Russell settled under the banyan tree and focused on fishing. But within just a couple of minutes, something unusual happened. When he glanced back, he noticed that his bicycle was gone, completely vanished. Startled, he immediately stood up and began searching all around. He looked carefully in every direction, but despite his efforts, he could not find it anywhere. As time passed, worry began to set in. He wondered what he would say when he returned home. How could his bicycle simply disappear like that? If someone had taken it, he reasoned, he would have surely heard something. The area was covered with dry leaves and twigs, and anyone walking there would inevitably make noise. Yet Russell had heard nothing at all. nor had he seen anyone nearby. If someone had truly taken the bicycle, it should have been visible, either the person or some trace of movement. But there was nothing, only silence. It was still daytime, not night, so it was impossible for something to simply disappear into darkness. Russell looked around carefully, scanning every direction. Yet he could not see a single person anywhere. There seemed to be no possible way for anyone to have taken the bicycle. If no one had come, then how could it have vanished? These thoughts lingered in his mind, yet he eventually sat back down and tried to focus on fishing. However, even after nearly 2 hours passed, he failed to catch a single fish. Disheartened, he packed up his belongings and headed home. After returning, he bathed, had his lunch, and later went out to spend time with his friends. At that time, Russell mostly spent his days with 2 older companions whom he respected like elder brothers. One was Arfin Bai and the other was Mabab Bai. Although they were older in age, they shared a close bond with him, almost like friends. That afternoon, Russell went straight to meet them, and they began chatting casually. After some time, Russell suggested, "It's been a while since we last went fishing. Let's go tonight." At first, both Arfin Bai and Mabab Bai were reluctant. But after Russell insisted several times, they finally agreed. They decided that they would go out later that night. After dinner, each bringing their own light and fishing tools. They also needed to bring a traditional fishing spear, locally known as a fachka. It was a long bamboo pole, about 9 to 10 feet in length, fitted at one end with multiple iron prongs, typically 25 to 30 sharp spikes. In rural areas, this tool was commonly used for catching fish by hand, and in different places it was known by different names. Later that night, everyone gathered at the agreed spot with their lights and equipment. By the time they were ready to leave, it was around 10:30 p.m. The night was cloudy with a light drizzle falling, typical of the rainy season. Slowly, they made their way toward the wetlands, wandering from place to place in search of fish. After quite some time, around 1 in the morning, they reached near a garden area. This garden was located a short distance south of the cremation ground Russell had visited earlier that day, the very place where his bicycle had mysteriously disappeared. The garden, too, had its share of unsettling stories. Strange incidents had reportedly happened there to some people, though it was not entirely abandoned. People still passed through occasionally, and such occurrences were considered rare, yet not unheard of. All 3 of them were somewhat aware of these stories. Around the wetlands nearby, many other people were also fishing. Lights could be seen scattered in different directions. Some carried kerosene lamps, others used flashlights. The 3 of them exchanged glances, silently weighing their options. Then Russell spoke up. "Let's go inside the garden and fish. I can hear movement. There are definitely fish there." That particular area was avoided by most people due to fear, which meant fewer disturbances and, likely, more fish. Mabab Bai was somewhat timid by nature, though he tried not to show it. Arfin Bai, on the other hand, was even more fearful. Both of them immediately discouraged Russell. "There's no need to fish here," they said. "Let's go somewhere else." Mabab Bai agreed, adding, "Exactly. We shouldn't stay here. It's already late. Who knows what might happen?" But Russell was determined. He had only caught 2 or 3 fish the entire time, and that was far from satisfying. The sound of fish splashing from inside the garden tempted him. He imagined catching 10 or 12 large tilapia, each weighing nearly half a kilogram. That thought alone drove him forward. Since the others refused to go, Russell said, "All right, you both stay here. I'll just go in for 5 or 10 minutes and catch a few fish. You can wait and talk." Without waiting for further response, he stepped down from the path into the garden. The ground there was about 2 to 2.5 feet lower than the road. As he entered, the water reached just below his knees, gradually rising as he moved forward. Holding his light in one hand and the spear in the other, he advanced slowly, scanning the surroundings carefully. Earlier, when he had heard the sound of fish and pointed his light in that direction, he had seen a group of them, quite large in size. Encouraged by this, he quietly followed their movement, stepping cautiously through the shallow water. After some time, he suddenly heard Arfin by calling out from behind. When he turned back, he saw that both Arfanbai and Mababbai were now far away. Arfanbai stood at a distance, while Mababbai had already begun walking back toward home. Arfanbai shouted, "There's no need to go any further. This place doesn't feel right." "Come back quickly," Arfanbai shouted. "Something bad could happen. Don't go any further." But Russell refused to listen. "Just a little more time," he replied. "I'll be back in a moment." With that, he resumed searching for the fish, trying to figure out where they had gone. Yet this time, he could not find them anywhere. After a few minutes, he suddenly realized that he was now standing in water nearly waist deep. The light drizzle that had been falling earlier had completely stopped. The sky, which had been dull and cloudy, began to clear in an unusual way. Then, as if out of nowhere, the full moon revealed itself, spreading a soft, silvery glow across the entire landscape. A cold, chilling breeze began to flow gently through the air. The surroundings, once dim and shadowy, were now strangely illuminated. Russell felt a surge of excitement. "Perfect," he thought. "The rain must have kept the fish down. But now that the moon is out, they'll come closer to the surface." Encouraged, he began scanning the water more carefully with his light, searching eagerly for movement. After a short while, his attention was drawn toward what looked like a raised ridge in a field, the kind that separates plots of land. Beyond the garden lay a vast stretch of farmland, submerged under water during the rainy season. In some areas, the water reached waist level. In others, it rose as high as the chest or even the neck due to uneven ground. Russell was standing at the very edge of the garden. Instead of stepping directly into the deeper field, he carefully followed the slightly elevated ridge, moving forward step by step. The water in that area was unusually clear, allowing him to see almost everything beneath the surface. With his bright light illuminating the water, he took a few cautious steps forward. Then, about 15 yards ahead, he noticed something unusual. It appeared to be a long, raised line, almost like a ridge, but it was marked with strange, circular patterns along its surface. He paused, staring intently, trying to understand what he was seeing. "Is it a ridge?" he wondered. "Or perhaps a fallen tree trunk?" The thought that it might be a fish never even crossed his mind. It seemed far too large for that. But within moments, the truth became clear. It was alive. Russell fixed his gaze on it, observing carefully. Slowly, he realized that it was indeed a massive fish. It was facing him, its head slightly raised, its fins moving gently on either side. What unsettled him most were its eyes. They looked almost human, though slightly cloudy and lifeless. For several long seconds, neither moved. Russell stared at the creature, and it stared back at him. Then, without warning, the fish turned away and began to glide slowly in the opposite direction. As it moved, Russell could finally see its full length. It was enormous, nearly 10 to 12 feet long, with large circular patterns covering its body. In that instant, he became convinced that it must be a giant snakehead fish, something he had only heard about before, never seen. A sudden determination took hold of him. "I have to catch it," he thought. Without hesitation, he began following it, moving deeper and deeper into the water. He searched for the right moment to strike with his spear. But as he pursued it, the fish seemed to be leading him further into deeper waters, almost as if it were luring him in. Eventually, the water rose to his chest. Still, he did not stop. Then, gathering all his strength, Russell hurled his spear toward the fish, aiming for its head. But the weapon he carried was far too small for a creature of that size, a fact that never crossed his mind in that moment of excitement. The spear struck, but not where he intended. It hit the tail. Instantly, the massive tail rose above the water and crashed down with tremendous force. With a single violent motion, the creature knocked the spear aside. Then it turned sharply and lunged toward Russell. Before he could react, it slammed into his chest with overwhelming power. The impact was devastating. Russell was thrown backward from chest-deep water into shallower ground. Later, describing that moment, he said it felt as if a massive tree trunk had struck his chest at incredible speed. At that instant, a terrifying realization dawned on him. This was no ordinary fish. It was something else, something unnatural. Panicked, he tried to call out to Maba Bai and Arfan Bai, but the force of the had left him breathless. The pain in his chest was so intense that he could barely raise his voice, let alone scream. But more terrifying than the impact itself was what followed. The moment the creature struck him, an overwhelming darkness descended from all sides, so dense and absolute that even the moonlight seemed powerless against it. The silvery glow that had illuminated everything just moments ago vanished in the blink of an eye, as if it had never existed. When Russell had entered the area earlier, there had been other people scattered across the wetlands, fishing with their lights. But now there was nothing. No voices, no movement, only a suffocating silence. Wherever he looked, there was only darkness. No sign of Maba Bai, no sign of Arfan Bai, no sign of anyone. Clutching his chest in pain, he struggled to breathe. For several minutes, he cried out desperately, shouting for help again and again. But no one heard him. There was no one left to hear him. The two men had already gone home long ago, shortly after warning him not to enter that place. Russell had believed they were still waiting for him on the road. Realizing he was completely alone, he began reciting prayers under his breath. As a student of a madrasa, he had memorized many supplications, and in that moment of fear, he clung to them with all his strength. Yet even more than faith, it was sheer terror that gripped him. Then a chilling realization struck him. While chasing the fish, he had unknowingly returned close to the same cremation ground where his bicycle had disappeared earlier that day. Just 20 to 25 yards farther, and he would have been dragged into much deeper water, a place where escape would have been nearly impossible. In such depth, even the strongest person loses control. Once the water rises to the chest, strength begins to fail. It becomes difficult even to remain standing, let alone fight against something unseen. Driven by fear, Russell forced himself to move back. Gathering whatever strength he had left, he stumbled toward higher ground and climbed back onto the path. And then he ran. He ran without direction, without thought, only fear driving him forward. He did not know which way he was going. He only knew he had to escape. After what felt like an endless run, he finally neared his home. And then, suddenly, something caught his eye. There, beside the gate, leaning quietly against a tree, stood his bicycle, the same one that had vanished earlier that day. It was covered in mud. At that sight, Russell could no longer hold himself together. Letting out a loud, terrified scream, he collapsed face first onto the ground and lost consciousness. The next morning, when he woke up, he found himself lying in his bed. His mother and sisters were sitting beside him, their faces filled with worry. They asked him what had happened the previous night. Russell told them everything except one detail. He did not tell them that the bicycle he had lost near the cremation ground had somehow returned, and that he had seen it again on his way back home that very night. After that incident, nothing unusual happened to him again. He did not fall ill, nor did he suffer any lasting harm. Physically, he remained completely fine, but the memory of that night stayed with him, and perhaps some questions were never meant to be answered.